All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It's such an important topic. It's timely, obviously, in Baltimore, and it's been in the headlines with Johns Hopkins, and also again recently in Williamstown, uh, in terms of with Williams grappling with the issue of slavery and Ephraim Williams's will and that kind of thing. But so I really want to say thank you to Jason Poling. Jason, he's probably here listening tonight, but he is, I guess, feeling under the weather, not really presentable, he said. So he's just going to take it easy. And I'm joined by Emily Proctor. Again, my name is Rob Swan from the Alumni Relations Office, from the class of 1990. Emily's class of 03. And of course, Gray Maggiano is also class of 03. And so just wanted to call your attention to the fact that we are recording this. I mean, just for anybody who misses the event, you can go back to the Williams website, the alumni.williams.edu/virtual. And if you miss an event that you really wanted to see, you can just go back and view the recording. So just wanted to throw that out there that we are recording this. So just keep that in mind. So we're gonna go for about an hour. Planning on finishing up at 8. I think Gray is gonna lead us through discussion about his experience with the church, but also you'll have time for some questions and answers. So we obviously are in a meeting format. You have the ability to raise your hand or to speak, but we're going to try to hold questions more towards the conclusion of his prepared remarks, and then we'll hopefully have a really wonderful discussion continuing from there. So with that, let me turn it over to Emily, and she's going to set the stage and introduce Gray. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Proctor, as class of 2003, a classmate of Gray, and we were actually both participants in the first year residential seminar. So we both were part of the group of students who opted to take Religion 101 and live with all our classmates our first year at Williams. And we kind of got to know each other through that and through our spiritual journeys. So we're both pastors now. I'm a Presbyterian minister in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, but served for 4 years right across the street from where Gray is now at Brown Memorial Park Avenue Presbyterian Church in Baltimore. So I think that's why Jason Poling asked me to kind of jump in and pinch hit for him tonight. So it's great to be here and really great to get to see Gray's face again. Great. Rather than me try to do your bio, I think it would probably be much better for you just to give us a little summary of who you are and your journey so far, and then maybe jump right into just specifically the last few years when you've been at Memorial Episcopal Church in Baltimore and what that journey has been in terms of uncovering the history of the church and deciding together how to move forward with that.
Thanks, Emily, and it's great to be with you all this evening. Thanks for joining. I want you to know this is the most EFI I've been in like 20 years, with a yellow chair and a purple shirt, and I even found a Williams hat to keep with me. I'm not the best alumni by any means, having missed the last 2 reunions for church-related activities, but I'm trying. So, but it is great to be with you all. I was class of 2003 at Williams. I grew up mostly in the Northern Virginia area, and I came to Williams from there. I was on campus for 3 years. I did my junior year abroad in Spain, which was a wonderful break from the Purple Valley. And then I went to Georgetown for graduate school. I worked for the State Department for 4 years, mostly focusing on Afghanistan, Pakistan work. And that was enough to drive me to the church. So I left that and went to seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. Was ordained in 2013 and served for 3 years in Miami, Florida, and then came up to Baltimore in 2016. My wife, Monica, and I met when I was studying abroad in Spain. We have 2 kids who are 9 and 4. Nicholas was born here in Baltimore and Isabella was born in Alexandria. And I've been at Memorial for 5 years next month. and it has been an eventful year, eventful 5 years. I did not intend to come here to make this church face its racist past and practice reparations. But it has been quite a journey. And I saw Frank's comment in the chat. And Frank, thank you for coming. And I've met Lydia Kelsey, who I believe is also a relation of yours, who's also an Episcopal priest. And the role that the Kelsey family played in trying to get this church on the right path, and continues to play as an example for us is wonderful. So thanks for being here. I'll start from the beginning and work backwards. 2 weeks ago, our church announced, or in January, our church announced a reparations fund, $100,000 a year for 5 years, to focus on 4 areas where we've noted that our church has done particular harm here in Baltimore. That's education, housing, voter engagement, voter rights, and climate justice. And we're focusing that money into the 21217 zip code, which, if you're not familiar with Baltimore, is the largest zip code in West Baltimore. It's also the poorest zip code in the city. This is a Winchester Sandtown and Pennsylvania Avenue, and the area where Freddie Gray was killed, in an area that has experienced a huge amount of disinvestment. It's also the part of Baltimore that used to be called Old West Baltimore, which was one of the first parts of the city that was open for free Blacks to own homes and live in Baltimore. And the subsequent redlining and segregation that continued after the Civil War up until, you could argue, the present day, is most stark. I don't know how many people are in Baltimore or familiar with Baltimore at all, but our church is in the Bolton Hill neighborhood, which is right on Utah Place, which is still a major dividing line in West Baltimore, between rich and poor, and between Black and white. So I could talk a long time, but let me just answer the question of, why did you do this? And I'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe Emily can ask me questions to make me sound smarter. So why did we do this? Memorial has a long history. The church was founded in 1860. We always knew that the church had strong Confederate sympathies. Of the first 9 rectors, or senior priests, rectors, 8 served in or supported the Confederacy. Only one was not associated with the Confederacy directly, and that continued. So that took us through 1930, which means from 1860 to 1930, it was clearly a bastion of the Confederacy and sort of the lost cause thinking after the Civil War. But that's kind of all we knew. So we started doing some digging, and the first story that became aware for us is a story of Frank's relative, Arthur Kelsey. He was a priest at Memorial in the 1950s. He was called as a young man, along with an associate priest named Sam Hale, and they were supposed to reinvigorate the community, the church, and reach back out to the community. But the first thing they tried to do was to integrate the parish. And they had a big plan to go door to door and knock on all the houses in the neighborhood and invite everyone to church. And when the plan was unveiled to the congregation, they quite literally ran him out of town. And he was forced out by the clergy with the support of the bishop, which is a sad thing. And the church stayed segregated until 1969, when another priest came in, whose name was Barney Farnham, and integrated the church essentially on his first day. And the more we dug into that story, the harder it got, because the church had never really told the truth about that. They always just said that Arthur Kelsey left on his own. It wasn't about race, it was just about class. And then in conversations with the Kelsey family, that they always felt quite wounded by this, because the church had never really acknowledged this. And then we dug back deeper and realized that the church was the place where housing segregation was invented, for better or for worse, in this country. The first housing segregation ordinance was written in our parish hall by vestry members. The Baltimore housing segregation ordinance was one of the ones that went to the Supreme Court and was eventually overturned. But the church wrote the church wrote letters of support, amicus brief to the Supreme Court. And if anyone out there has access to the Supreme Court archives, I'd love to get a copy of that. And going back further than that, they were very active in trying to stop, take the vote away from African Americans in Maryland. There was a number of efforts to amend the Maryland Constitution in the early 1900s, which were vigorously supported by the person who held my position, a rector named William Meade Dame, who served for 45 years at the church. And then we got back to the very beginning and learned that the two founding priests, contrary to the narrative that they were, good Episcopalians, that they both owned slaves. They both owned slaves in the city, and both enslaved people here in the city. And both of their families had significant holdings of enslaved people. And then we did a little more digging, and actually it was our deacon, Natalie Conway, who discovered that her great-great-grandmother, Hattie Cromwell, was enslaved at Hampton Plantation in Towson, just outside the city of Baltimore. And the family that enslaved them was the Ridgely Howard family, and the founder of our church was Charles Ridgely Howard. And in a sort of a cruel twist, it's likely that Hattie and Charles were born at Hampton at about the same time, and yet led very different lives. And so I think once that story came to light, we realized that there was just no way for us to ignore it. We had to be able to respond and do something. And so that put us on the path to really further explore our own history, to first reconcile internally with what it meant for us. Natalie had to figure out if she wanted to stay. And thanks be to God that she did. She did want to stay with us. And then we had to figure out how to respond. And so first we did some internal things. We removed some plaques from the sanctuary and honoring the founding rectors. We draped a painting that was a memorial to William Meade Dame, and replaced it with another piece of art. And then we began this conversation around reparations, and finally made that announcement in January. And that's where we came today. All right, Emily, what did I forget, or what should I say that I didn't say?
No, thank you so much, Gray. It's great to hear that narrative and the summary. I mean, I have so many questions that come to my mind. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions that pop up for you, I was struck by when you talked about the first rector that tried to integrate the church, and what happened to him, and then also the diocesan. Sounds like both the diocese and the congregation were opposed to that. How has that changed? So in terms of doing the reparations work, doing the digging, what's the context like now in terms of diocesan support for the work you're doing, and the congregational support?
I think Scott asked a question about sort of the character of our congregation. It's fair to say that you would be hard pressed to find a more liberal congregation in the entire Episcopal Church. We're a pretty liberal church, and Emily's nodding her head because she used to serve across the street. I am someone who is, obviously unapologetically anti-racist and pro-LGBT. And very concerned about immigrant rights, and I'm usually the most conservative person in the room in a lot of things. So certainly a leg up in terms of having these conversations at a parish level. But we also, you sort of fall into the trap where you can become so progressive that you just think you're really good and can't imagine that you've ever done anything wrong or you have any, particular racist feelings. And when we started having internal conversations about, implicit bias and how we, because a lot of this started from the question of, Baltimore is 65, 70% African-American. Our neighborhood's about 50% African-American, and our church, when I got here, was like 95% white. So why is that the case if we are these good, accepting, progressive, wonderful people? And so once that was the harder part, was getting people to begin to deal with their own implicit biases. At the diocesan level, the support has been overwhelmingly positive. The Diocese of Maryland passed a unanimous resolution in 2019 in favor of the idea of reparations, and then a resolution in 2020 that passed with, Jason would know better than me, but something like 78% of the diocese approval to set up $1 million reparations fund at the diocesan level. So I think the diocese is very supportive of the work, but those, I think when it comes to reconciling with the diocesan history, that's another story. The cathedral here in Baltimore was founded by 3 congregations who fled. They were white flight congregations in the 1920s, leaving West Baltimore. They joined together to form the cathedral. They planted the cathedral, and then the next year they put a big Confederate monument right across the street. Was not subtle in terms of what that meant. And so, I think I'm still waiting to see some real response from the diocese about its own legacy and its own story in Baltimore, which we haven't really. They're beginning to work on it, but we haven't seen that yet.
And one of the questions that has come to me through the chat, and which I had as well, is like, so when you started this investigation or this digging, like at whose initiative was that? Like, how did that process get started? Did you initiate it? Was it already in the works when you got there?
No, it was me. I mean, I pushed pretty hard to get them to talk about it. I think there was also kind of a pent up energy around it. We have a core group of African American members who've been in the parish for a long time, and they had expressed to me that they had tried to have conversations around racism in the past, and it never went well. And so they were just kind of didn't want to do it again, but they did want us to get to a place where we could do it again. So that was a big part of that conversation.
Did you? I'm a little in the know just because my husband is an Episcopal priest, so one of the things we did down here, which talk about white flight, Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. It's like white flight for the whole nation. But one of the things we did was we took advantage of the Sacred Ground curriculum that the Episcopal Church offers as a way to begin having some of these conversations about race and educate yourself about the history of race in the United States, especially geared to white people, starting that work among themselves, so as to not create quite as much trauma when they try to have those conversations across racial lines. Did y'all use any kind of curriculum or program like that to start having these conversations, or what?
We've had a couple different. The curriculum piece we used with the leadership in the church was the Seeing God in the Face of the Other, and this is a training required by our diocese, and it's about 48 to 56 hours of condensed time. And we did it in conjunction with St. Catherine of Alexandria Episcopal Church. St. Catherine's is a historically Black Episcopal church that's 8 blocks away from us. And the rest, that's 8 blocks away from us. And, it's pretty obvious why, we have these 2 churches so close to each other. And so a lot of our work has been developing that relationship and kind of reconciling with their congregation and beginning to understand, each other, and how we can be in better relationship.
Great, thank you. So once you began the investigation, like who was it that did the digging, and like what did that look like?
We had a team of people who got together in the beginning, and we actually had a set of questions that we went out and asked everybody in the parish about their own experiences. We talked about both the positive side, the good justice things that Memorial had done, and then the negative side. And we, collected all these interviews and began to compile information, and then kind of gave people research assignments. You go look at this, and you go figure this out, and you call that person. And then once things really got rolling, we actually had a lot of help from outside institutions. The diocesan archivist helped us a lot with diocesan files. The curator at Hampton Plantation has been, tremendously helpful in getting us information, and also Virginia Seminary, which has a lot of historic files on the early founders of the church, because they were all, VTS grads, have been helpful as well.
Another question that I've gotten, which is one that we also kind of emailed about, was where did you get resistance in the congregation? You mentioned the challenge of sort of people confronting their own implicit bias. Yeah, where else?
Yeah, I think where we had gotten resistance for a long time was like, we knew we had to do something, but what were we going to do? And a real reticence to kind of commit, particularly on and some of that came from a good place. The idea of saying, hey, this is we're going to do reparations, makes it seem like, okay, you can finish it and be done with it. And I think we had to sort of understand ourselves, that we were gonna move into a place where, like, there was where we understood that this was the work of our church for a long time, versus this was like a one-time thing. So, and that sort of, I see Topper's question about, like, how do you define success? I think the markers of success will come incrementally. A lot of our focus is on, a few square blocks in the 21217 zip code. And so we're beginning to see a real change there. We're looking at this from a real justice mindset. So it's not about just, like, putting a food pantry or setting up some kind of charity activity, but really sort of changing the reality for a lot of people. So if we're able to organize a whole neighborhood, for example, in West Baltimore, help a bunch of people turn from renters into homeowners, reestablish St. Catherine's as a central part of the church, and give them some real voting power and influence in the city. That would be success for us. To be honest, I think the success would be if in 5 years we've spent double the amount of money we committed to, and have no intention of stopping anytime soon.
Where is the money for reparations coming from? Is it part of an endowment? Like, and what is the cost of doing that to your church, to your congregation?
Yeah, so I think the advantage of having a small church with a small endowment is it doesn't hurt as much to take a large percentage of it. So we took out 10% of our endowment. It would be interesting to see Williams try and do the same thing. But 10% of our endowment was only $50,000. So we took that out, and then we'll match that this year with an additional $50,000 just from our operating budget. And then we've committed to the $100,000 going forward. And the biggest impacts, in terms of cost for us, will be around. It's all the other stuff that we'd like to do, and just won't be able to do. And actually, for me, that's actually a blessing. that a church with 1,000 cooks and no helpers, suddenly I can tell them, no, we can't do that because we said we're going to do this thing. And then, we will obviously be looking at a lot of grants and other ways to set up the fund and these programs going forward. But all the contributions, all the work is supporting Black-led justice organizations in West Baltimore. And I think part of the reason we felt comfortable doing this is we have really good relationships already with a lot of those organizations, and we have a lot of confidence in their work, and they trust us to partner. So it'll work out well, I think.
You mentioned that there was some resistance. I can't remember if this was in an email or in what you said, to the removing of some of the plaques and the covering of the art.
Oh yeah.
And and I just wonder, because down here, it's very the culture and the political and theological culture is very different from Baltimore, and so we hear a lot about cancel culture, and we in this county, Richard and I both participated in an effort to try to remove the Confederate flag from the courthouse, but it's still there. But so how, was that any kind of the resistance that you encountered, and how do you, tell the story, how do you deal with that aspect of trying to make reparations for a racist past without just sort of wiping out the history, how do you,
Yeah, I mean, I think the resistance we faced was in many ways much more parochial. It was like, oh, they've always been there. We like them. What are we going to put in its place? There was a lot of kind of that, just the same kind of resistance you have to like painting the walls a different color. But it's fascinating. Even when African American members of the congregation would say, hey, I can't sit in this space and know that those people owned my people, that people were still like, yeah, but couldn't we just contextualize it or something? And so that, I think it really interesting to sort of pick apart as to how quickly we were willing to devalue people's hurt and pain in those moments, and the need to sort of to push back against that and remind people that the community here is much more important than whatever's in this building.
Got a couple more questions here. What from Jen, a fellow O3er, Jen Nail. What advice would you give to nonprofits starting their own anti-racist and equity work, resources, tips, etc.? And I would add to that, churches, too.
I think the most important thing is to learn your story. A lot of people, I think, jump into this work with the goal to feel better about themselves, and so they end up in situations where they simply just don't know the real story. I talk a lot about asymmetric information. The people at St. Catherine's, the congregation is 60% 70 and 80-year-old Black women. So they lived this whole story and they know this whole story. Most of my congregation has no context for it. And if they do, they've sort of blotted it out of their memory. So first we have to, it's not like we're not uncovering something new. We're just we're catching up to what everybody else already knows. And so getting to the point where you're on a similar playing field to something that people know implicitly on the other side of a line is really important. And I think the other important is just having good partners. The first thing, the Monday morning after our vote, I called 10 different organizers that I've been doing work with in West Baltimore for the last few years, just to get a sense of how is this being received? What is the response that you're hearing? How do we make sure that we don't mess this up? And it was really helpful to get their feedback on, what next steps should look like, and what they would want to see from us, and how they want to kind of see us work this through. And so having good partners is important. We've been doing a whole lot of media stuff just because it's gotten a lot of attention. But I'm very much looking forward to being able to just step back and begin to highlight the work of these organizations and how we're kind of able to support them and help them move forward.
And were those organizations ones that Memorial already had a strong relationship with when you got there, or were they relationships that you had to?
No, well, in the Baltimore, the justice landscape in Baltimore has changed dramatically since 2015. And so, I came in at a really helpful, poignant time in order to sort of walk alongside some groups as they came up and learn from people who had been involved in in the Freddie Gray protests, and then out of that started their own initiatives and organizations. So, it's mostly new relationships or revised relationships. Yeah.
Some of the other questions we've gotten is, the reaction from the outside, has it been mostly positive from media and politicians, journalists?
I think that the reaction's been mostly positive. We were really thoughtful about how we approached this and took a lot of time with it. Really focusing on the theological and biblical aspects of reparations and what it means to repair and restore relationship. And, that made it so that, we tried to separate it out from the larger political conversation about sort of the government paying reparations and really focus on, identifying areas where we knew our church had done harm and developing relationships and putting resources together to try and, repair some of those things. And, even like the hate mail we got was pretty lame. It was, Italian Americans telling me that I should pay them reparations. And I was like, well, I'm also Italian American. So but yeah, I think I think it's a hard thing to push back on because it's us doing work with resources that we have, responding to our story, which is what every organization should do.
Have you had any parishioners leave because of this work, or any parishioners join, particularly, people of color?
Definitely had people join. Definitely had Black Baltimoreans come and join the congregation, and not had too many people leave. A few angry people, but they were probably going to leave anyway over something else. More important than the numbers of Black members is just the support we have within the African American community and the support from other pastors. I think something I think a lot about in this work is that, like, I don't want to be robbing other congregations and other organizations of their members and staff and supporters to make myself feel better, or to make us feel better as a white congregation. So, it's less important the number of people in the pews as it is our relationship in the brighter community. I will say that we've, when I got here, all the church leadership was white, and almost all the church leadership was male. And we've diversified that exceptionally with our board chairs and African American. We have both African American and white clergy, male and female, gay and straight on the altar every Sunday, and have been real intentional about projecting what we think the kingdom of God should look like to Baltimore.
As this is Jason is like shooting me questions individually in the chat that you all don't see, so don't give me any credit for the good questions. But when you checked in with some of your community organizer friends throughout the process, did they have some can you be specific about some of the helpful suggestions they made, or pitfalls maybe that they were able to help you avoid in the process?
Yeah, don't steal our staff. Right, like we know we need to hire at least one person to help make this work happen. But if I go out there and get the best person from No Boundaries Coalition, or steal someone from Organizing Black, which is just trying to get started, then I'm hampering somebody else's work. And they actually suggested, instead of doing that, why don't you hire somebody younger and we'll coach them. So they'll do work for you and for us, and we'll coach them to help them know what they need to do. And then you have them, and then we have one more asset in West Baltimore doing this kind of work. So that kind of advice was invaluable. And then another piece of advice was thinking about the resources our community already had to be an asset. This is just basic asset-based community development, but that because we're a established 501c3, we can serve as a fiduciary agent for small groups trying to get started. So how do we offer that service to neighborhood coalitions or other groups that are trying to organize around a particular issue and help them grow? So I think just that's the kind of stuff that's really helpful to think about.
How do you respond to pushback? This comes from James, which I hear this all the time down here, right? Politics in the church, and the church should be a safe space from politics and the political, and yeah.
I mean, the church is, politics has always been in the church, and to pretend that it's not is its own form of politics, right? It's its own form of privilege, and we try and be, respectful, and we try and be open and involve everyone in the conversation. And at most Sundays, you won't hear me preach from the pulpit, anything that's going to seem divisive, because those I guess I always learned that preaching is a one-way conversation. So if I'm going to talk about something political or talk about something controversial, I'd much rather do it in a dialogue where we can have conversation about it, and like you have a voice and I have a voice, versus me just lecturing. And again, because our congregation is so liberal, often the sermons they like the least are when I say things like, you also have to love Trump voters, right? Conservatives are people too. Like that getting that message is hard for them to hear, and it's a reminder to them that we are not nearly as accepting as we think we are.
Has this left you with any thoughts about speaking politics,
Yeah,
of what a national or governmental, what reparations should look like outside the church?
I think a deeper look at both local and state and national level of where harm has been done and how to respond to it. I think some of the national housing policies, for example, clearly require some kind of response. And you see that in the way that HUD crafts opportunity zone grants and other things, that there's attempts to respond to that, but they're not I don't think they're targeted enough at the areas where real harm has been done. And I think in some ways we're seeing it work backwards. The continued defunding of public education in this country is a prime example of that. And our church was helped to start Strong Schools Maryland, which was an advocacy group here in the state of Maryland that helped to get the Kerwin Commission passed. So we certainly had folks who were very happy this past week when that finally overrode the governor's veto. And as someone who's had their kids in Baltimore City public schools, I'm aware firsthand of the kind of crazy inequalities that have been faced. But honestly, it's less about money and more about culture. In 2016, they built a new Henderson Hopkins Elementary School over in East Baltimore, and the idea was that it would be the preeminent example of integrated education. They would get the best teachers and the best Hopkins faculty and all the best equipment and resources, and then they would put it all together, and they'd have this wonderful mix of students, and it would be kumbaya, right? That was the dream. And of course, the first thing that happened was too many Black kids from the neighborhood were enrolled in the school, so all the Hopkins parents pulled their kids out, and then they had to figure out how they could balance it the other way. And if you go back to 1960, when Mount Royal Elementary School was built in Bolton Hill, there's newspaper articles in the Sun that tell the exact same story. This was going to be the first purpose-built integrated school. We get the best equipment, the best schools, the best teachers, everything, and it would magically work. But as soon as you hit like more than 50%, African-American students, the white Bolton Hill parents started pulling their kids out. And the quotes you read in the paper are both heartbreaking, but incredibly familiar about the reasons the parents gave for pulling their kids out of schools. And so, yes, there should be financial compensation, but unless we have kind of a community-wide, like a country-wide soul searching about our own, thoughts, feelings, and prejudices, it only goes so far.
Thank you. How did your time at Williams prepare you or not prepare you for this work?
I mean, I was thinking about like what were experiences from Williams that helped me. So I think that the first was like I learned very quickly that there were rules and then there were rules, and that I could find, like, if there's something I really wanted to do, the rules didn't matter as much, as long as I could convince someone it was like a worthwhile thing. So like I didn't do a single winter study on campus, and I traveled abroad, for 4 of them, for all 4 winter studies, even though that was clearly against the rules. And basically I just kind of wrote a nice letter to the professor that I was supposed to be in a winter study class with, about what I was doing, because I went to Honduras to, help train Sunday school teachers, and they were like, okay. So I learned that like that it's okay, that how to bend the rules to do, the good work. But the other was like not a fear for standing up for what's right. I go back, I think, so you all don't know, but Emily and I worked together to start a group called The Feast, which was still a progressive Christian club or group on campus. And it started in part because my Bible study leader my freshman year was kicked out of the Williams Christian Fellowship when he came out of the closet. And I just thought that was terrible, because this was like the one person who was helping me hold it together in this really terrible year that I had in my freshman year at Williams. And they were just going to throw him out because he didn't meet some sort of preconceived standard. And so it was certainly a lot of work, but between Emily and myself and Keith and Gianna, and with the support of Rick Spalding, put this new group together that was just built around sort of being in fellowship with each other and caring for each other, and that it was worth doing because it felt like the right thing to do, and so that's probably the biggest learning, and it resulted in 3 of the 4 of us getting ordained. So
we were small but mighty. Yeah. And as I recall, we started just by asking questions. Like we were looking at the tenets of progressive Christianity and just asking questions about that and what that meant, and around a meal. Yeah.
Is this the part where you ask me like the fun Williams questions?
Yeah. Your favorite dining hall?
I mean, I have strong memories of walking to Greylock.
Yeah.
Somehow Greylock brunch seemed more exciting than Baxter brunch. I don't know why. I lived in Old Eye or Thompson Hall for my sophomore and senior years, and so we were pretty removed from a lot of the other places to eat. So occasionally in Mission, but I hated Mission for some reason.
Any classes you wish you could go back and take again, or take that you never took?
The class I would go back and take every year for the rest of my life was Don Quixote with Leila Ruhi. just, an amazing life-changing class. The classes I wish I had taken that didn't were art history. Like all I know about art history, Jen Nail, who's also on here, taught me after she took art history. And it's just embarrassing that I didn't take that at Williams. And if that would be like a sabbatical, go up to Williamstown and audit it or something.
If it makes you feel better, I took art history 101 and 102, but it was really early in the morning and it was so dark. Like that's the class I wish I could go back and retake. Now that I've like had the overview and volunteered at at the museums, and I wish I could go back and actually learn everything. It's so overwhelming, when you take it the first time, not knowing jack squat.
Well, I'm the chaplain at MICA, which is the Maryland Institute College of Art here in Baltimore, and I just feel like an idiot talking to these kids because I don't, I just have to make up when they're talking about stuff and pretend like I know what they're saying.
I don't know if you know the story, but when I was an associate at Brown Memorial, it was MICA move-in day, and as you know, on that day, they're just like lines of cars driving past our two churches. And I was like there, and our head of staff wasn't there, and I was like, how do I get all these students who are driving by our welcoming, inclusive church to see us as anything other than this just big gray stone facade? And so like I was like, oh, the youth room has a rainbow flag, and I ran and got it, and there was nobody to ask permission, so I just hung it up over the sanctuary doors.
Is that why it's there?
That's why it's there.
Wow.
And then after the fact, I was like, I did that. Is that okay? And like, and everybody's like, yeah, sure. Okay. And then like NPR did a story about it. And then I just recently had a MICA student was looking to interview folks about her art project. And so you just never know. But yeah, that's how that flag got up there.
Well, it's still there, so good work.
Do you have any thoughts? I haven't had time. I just got sent the Williams Record article about its history today, and I haven't had time to read through the whole thing. Do you have any thoughts for how Williams might address its history in light of your work?
I do, believe it or not. Now, I think that honestly, for an institution like Williams, the conversation about Ephraim Williams, the number of people that he had enslaved and what happened to them is a fine conversation to have, but it will ultimately be a lot of energy that should be better spent elsewhere. I think looking at the legacy of slavery at Williams, looking at, what did segregation look like at the school? In what ways did they support? Did important alumni support? Continuing segregation and housing and education and everything else. How is Williams today as a place where students of color feel comfortable being on campus? How does it support them, or does it sort of try and narrow their focus into a dominant white way of viewing the world? Those are the better conversations to have. Otherwise, you're just going to have a lot of energy talking about, changing names and mascots, and which I think are, and I don't want to, in some institutions that certainly needs to happen. Given Williams' history and story and the size of its, both endowment and alumni base, really thinking more critically about the role of Williams has played or has not played in civil rights from 1793 to today.
Yeah, it calls to mind the words of the prayer, right? For all the things I have done and left undone. When you start talking about what you have left undone, that's when you gotta fall back on the faith and ask for mercy. Have there been any spiritual practices that have been particularly helpful to you and your congregation during this time of investigation?
So when once Natalie kind of came forward and told us her story, we went out to Hampton Plantation, our church in St. Catherine's together, and Natalie devised a libation ceremony, which she was based on some practices among enslaved peoples to re-sanctify land after terrible things had happened. And so we consecrated some holy water and took it out with us, and took turns reconsecrating that soil and acknowledging all of our ancestors in that. And then the last two people were Steve Howard, who's an indirect descendant of Charles Ridgely Howard, and Natalie Conway, descendant of Hattie Cromwell, pouring it out together. There were prayers involved. I have no idea what they were, but the impact of the two of them being able to do that together and share in that moment was very powerful.
Have you personally felt like you've been transformed at all in this journey? And if so, how?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, coming to grips with my own sort of inherent racism and the reality of racism in my family has been sobering. You always think your forebears were better than they are, but recognizing that a lot of the racism I learned from my grandparents, and having a distinct memory of my grandmother telling me, it's okay to cross the street if you see a Black person walking towards you because you're scared, and that, like, echoing through my head for a long time. So just learning how to, being able to process all of that and become, more humble in my own reactions to things, learning how to sort of relearn how to exist in the world. There's an implicit bias test that Harvard has put together, and I don't usually say good things about Harvard, but the test is a good one. And I took it when I was in Miami, and it came out as sort of somewhat biased, somewhat biased against Black people, which was not much of a surprise. But after being in Baltimore for 2 years, I took it again, and it came out as very biased. And I started to try to process why. And Emily, you are familiar with Bolton Hill, and some of you may be as well. But there's 1,000 messages a day on different social media things about watch out, there's 3 Black kids walking down the street, or encouraging the police, encouraging you to call cops whenever you see something suspicious. And that the passive consumption of information telling me that these 13, 14-year-old Black kids that were walking to school were bad was warping my brain. And then I needed to change how I consumed that information so not consume it, but also begin to reprocess how I approach those interactions. And that actually been extremely helpful.
Going back to that question about Williams and how it prepared, I learned about implicit bias at Williams in cognitive psychology classes, and that's a great thing to learn and teach and introduce other people to. Do you have I know you mentioned Don Quixote. Did you have a favorite or most influential Williams professor or staff member?
Jim Mann was sort of a poli-sci and econ. I was a poli-sci and Spanish literature grad, and I did probably 50% of my classes with Jim. He was also a member of St. John's Episcopal Church in Williamstown, and I was one of the few kids who showed up there every Sunday. And so, but I think that he gave me a new way to think about the world and interrogate the world around me, and with an eye then towards Latin America, where I still have a lot of interest, but it served me, everywhere else as well. He's also the one who told me to get a master's in public policy instead of, a PhD in economics. So I'm grateful for that.
I'm going to throw a shout out to, you mentioned Chaplain Rick Spalding. That was for me. That was my most influential Williams staff person.
Well, and like, we're talking about, racism, but obviously, bigotry towards the LGBT community is another part that the church has been really involved in. And, I was your typical kind of high school jock, even though I was from a super nerdy school, where like, to me, gay was just an epithet you threw at your friends to embarrass them. And coming to Williams and meeting Rick, and then my roommate, who was gay, my best friend came out of the closet shortly thereafter, my brother a year after, and like, it was just, and Rick was just this like godly, wonderful human, who had been told by his church that he could not be a wonderful human because of who he loved. So yeah, impact on my life too.
Yeah.
Not enough to make me Presbyterian though.
Yeah. I met Rick actually before he started at Williams, the General Assembly to the Presbyterian Church, and had a conversion experience at a LGBT protest that was happening outside our General Assembly. And then providentially was introduced to Rick, like, then, 2 days later, and yeah, the rest is history. Thankfully, a Presbyterian church has come a long way since 2000. And I actually just preached a sermon welcoming our Presbytery's first openly gay pastor to First Presbyterian Church Tallahassee for the installation service. So yay. And she's in a preaching group with Rick or was. So yeah, awesome. Very exciting.
Are there other questions from the body before we?
Yeah. Did we miss anybody's question? Wave at us or post in the chat.
I think we might have
Sarah,
gotten
if you're there, hi.
Is anybody else? All right, well, Gray, Emily, thanks so much. Jason, thank you for your silent participation here tonight and for organizing so many wonderful events over this year over COVID through the Williams College Association of Maryland. This is such an important topic, and so I'm just going to share my screen here. Just we're Williams. Hopefully, you guys have seen the. We're doing bicentennial celebrations, founding the Society of Alumni. So February is a themed month of events that are kind of focusing on community inclusion and diversity. And this one was really just set aside on our calendar several weeks ago by Jason, and after talking to Gray, and it really ties in very closely with some other things that we're offering. So there's an event coming up on Thursday, and then so I wanted to call attention to that if you want to join us for that one. And then I believe we've been working with Keebler Carey and Jason, of course, for the next Williams College Association of Maryland event, which is, I think, 5 weeks from now on March 22nd. I think it's Melissa Osborne Groves, class of 93, is going to just discuss sort of a topic about education, so student learning outcomes in the wake of COVID. It's a really important topic, not only just for every age group in schools, all the way up, elementary through the university level. So it'll be a really interesting topic. So please mark your calendars and join us for that. Again, thanks so much, Gray, for such a wonderful discussion and for what you're doing in Baltimore. I mean, really is amazing. So I'll continue to follow along through online or through the papers. And so thanks everyone for joining us. We hope to see you soon at another Williams event.
Thanks all.
Bye.